Paige Ruth Pritchard is a natural resources specialist with the Texas Optimization Program and Response Team in the Emergency Preparedness and Response section. Paige has a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science with a minor in Sociology from Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. Paige started with the TCQ in 2015 as a public drinking water investigator in the Beaumont Regional Office, and she joined the Optimization Program in 2022 and has been working with water systems in the coastal and East Texas regions. Please welcome Paige.
Okay, so we're gonna get started, and I'm gonna go fast. This class is usually like a 4-hour class, so I'm breaking it down to 45 minutes, so we'll see how far we can get. Conducting investigations. Why do we conduct investigations? So about every 3 years if you're a community system, or every 5 years if you're a non-community system, your regional TCEQ investigators will show up and look over your records, and then they will also look over your plant and your distribution system. And that is mandated by the EPA, which is why they do it. And usually the first thing they're gonna ask of you is your general plant information. So this is a record that you should have available to them whenever they come out. They're gonna wanna know if you've had any changes in your responsible party. So if you've had a new mayor, if you had a new operator, they're gonna wanna know how many pressure planes you have, your connections, active and inactive. They're also gonna wanna know all of your plant capacities and your capacities for the equipment that you have at the plants. If in between inspections you have had any changes, like in operators or mayors, whoever, and you need to make changes on drinking water watch, you can email PWS Inven and say, hey, I need to make a change to my responsible party before your investigators get out there, and that change will be seen on drinking water watch. The next thing that you're gonna need to have available, if you have them, so if you purchase our wholesale water, you need to have those contracts available as well, and these are records that you need to keep. One of the main things to look at before your investigators come out, make sure that that has not expired, make sure that that contract is still valid, and then also I always advise doing your capacities before they come out, and making sure that you're not capacity deficient, and seeing if these still apply to your water system. So they're gonna look at your max daily demand or hourly daily delivery rate, and also if that record has expired or not when they come out. The next thing is your operator notice form. So all of these forms that you're gonna see throughout this presentation can be found, you can go to tcq.com, you can look at the compliance notebook, and they will have all of these forms in there that you can use. So all of these on here come from that compliance notebook. So this operator notice form is something that you need to fill out on a yearly basis and submit to TCEQ. The main thing here is we're looking to see, have you changed operators? Do you have any operators in training? Because you can only be an operator in training for a year once you claim that. Those are the things that they're gonna be looking at. And common mistakes that we see with this that you could receive violations from is did not turn the form in annually and did not include your operators or operator in training on the form. So exceptions and ACRs are alternative capacity requirements. So any exceptions or ACRs that you acquire for your system, you need to keep those on file and have those available as well. If you don't have those, or you're new to the system and you cannot find them, but you think that you have some, you can contact your regional investigators and say, hey, I need you to send me over these exceptions or ACRs, and they should be able to find those documents for you and send them to you so that you can have them available. If you need to apply for an exception, you can send your request to ptrs@tcq.texas.gov. Another thing to look for before you have your inspection for these ACRs and exceptions is there will be stipulations in these exceptions that you need to follow, whether that is collecting extra samples, stuff like that. So you need to know what those are for each exception that you have before they come out. So monthly operating reports, this is also a record that you need to keep. They're also known as the MORs. And that's going to be the volume of water, the amount of chemicals, and your disinfectant residuals. How often you do that, either daily or weekly, is going to be dependent on your connection count and your population. So it's either a daily or weekly until you get down to disinfectant residuals. And then if you are under 250 connections or under that 750 population, it is once every 7 days. That's not a weekly, that is every 7 days. So whenever your inspectors come out, they'll count like, hey, you collected this day, 7 days from there, did you collect another one? So even on weekends, if you're a small system, you need to go ahead and collect those. And this is what a daily monitoring log sheet looks like. And that is from that compliance notebook that I told y'all about in the very beginning. Okay, common mistakes that we see. Recording the amount or volume of water used once a month and not on a weekly or daily basis. Not recording the amount of chemicals used to treat water. Recording how many bottles of chemicals are added to your reservoir. And monitoring the disinfectant residual once per week versus once every 7 days. All right, so here's the fun part. We get to determine whether this is compliant or not, but I'm just gonna go through and tell y'all. So looking at this, we can see that this is not compliant because we do not know what any of those numbers are. And then the next question is, how could we make this compliant? So if this operator wanted to make this compliant, to each day they could add their amount of water used, their residual, and their chemicals used. And they could record that, and that would be adequate. So what about this one? Is this one compliant? So yes, this one is compliant. It has your well meter readings, it has how much chemicals they used, and then on a separate sheet, they have their disinfectant residuals. And it is okay to have those on 2 separate sheets. You don't need to have them on 1 sheet. All right, flushing records. So dead-end mains. TCQ requires you to flush your dead-end mains on a monthly basis. That is a log sheet over there. You can get those from that compliance notebook as well if you are in need of a flushing log record. And some other things that you might want to collect for your process control would be the length of your flush, the volume of water flushed, and what your residual was at the beginning and end of your flush. And you also need to keep these flushing data for 2 years for that record. And some common mistakes that we see with flushing logs, that's gonna be not having a flushing log when you have dead-end mains. So if you have any dead-end mains in your system, you have to flush them. You will need to have a flushing log. And then another thing that is required is that you record the date that you flushed. So that's something that we would see is not having the dates recorded on the dead-end flush log. And then this one is a big one. Whenever I was an investigator, this is the one that I probably cited the most. Not having your dead-end flushing records match your distribution system map. So if you've had any updates, new subdivisions, anything like that, and you now have dead ends in that area, you need to update your flush log to match that. Okay, so which one is compliant? This one right here is gonna be your compliant one. As you can see, they have the dates that they flushed, they have the locations that they flushed, and they recorded whether they were dead ends or not. And then this other one is gonna be a no. And that's gonna be because it does not have the date, even though it says date here, it does not have the date, and it also doesn't have the location. Okay, so coliform sampling or RTCR form, this is another form that you need to have. And this is just your back tees that you collect, so your original site and then your upstream or downstream sites, those also need to be filled out. This should have a map associated with it that shows your original locations and your upstream and downstream locations. Copies of your back tees and such should be kept for 5 years. All right, common mistakes that we see with the sample siting plan. Not having a plan at all, but at this point, everyone should have one of these. So if you don't have one, please make one. And then another thing that would happen is the system would have one, but then they would have operator leave and the records would get lost and stuff. So if you're new to a system, locate the sample siting plan and make sure that you have one available. Not rotating through the sample site locations in the plan. So you shouldn't just be collecting all of your back tees from one site. You should be collecting them through each one of your sites. So that way you get an adequate representation of your distribution system. And then not having a map associated to this plan. And then another thing, it should be included with your monitoring plan, should be attached to your monitoring plan. Lastly, not having a licensed operator collecting the bacteriological samples and signing off on them. That's another thing that whenever your investigators come out, they should be looking at that and making sure that a licensed individual is doing that. All right, which brings us to monitoring plans. So all public water systems are required to maintain a chemical and microbial monitoring plan, and this is going to need to be kept for forever. It will need to be updated though, and typically it's only going to need to be updated when you have like sampling addresses change or a new water system owner, maybe adding new like emergency contacts, stuff like that. And then if you have added any like booster plants or new PWSs, you can add that to this plan as well. And again, like I said before, your sample siting plan needs to be attached to your monitoring plan. When I first started at the agency, we had a monitoring plan for mobile home parks. I still have this one, but I don't know if it is still available. This one over here is the one that we use now. It's for tceq.com. You can type in monitoring plan, and it's just a plug and chug document. You just add your stuff into it, and it will spit you out an adequate monitoring plan. Common mistakes that we see with monitoring plans: not updating information in the monitoring plan when there have been changes, not providing a plant schematic that includes your entry point locations on that schematic, not including a sampling method and compliance calculations for all samples, not identifying your compliance method used, which this next slide I will talk about the different areas of the monitoring plan, and not including your RTCR sample siting plan or your lead and copper sample sites or your lab approval form, which I will also talk about here in a minute. The rule also indicates that addresses of each sample site shall be included in your monitoring plan, or the location of each site shall be noted on a distribution system map. Most people choose to do the sample site list and schedule like this. And then each section of the monitoring plan must have a frequency, location, method, and compliance. So the frequency is going to be how often you collect that sample. So you do that daily, do that weekly. Is it a quarterly sample, annual, whatever? You put that frequency there. And then the location is going to be this sample site list that you have. Most people will just add that to the locations there. The method is going to be the method that you're using to collect that sample. Like, are you collecting it with the DR900? Do you send it off to a lab? And then also, what program are you using if you're using the DR900 to collect those? And then compliance is going to be what the TCEQ compliance is. So if you're doing free chlorine residuals, you'd say we're within compliance if our free chlorine residual is above a 0.2 milligram per liter in distribution at all times. All right, so another thing that your monitoring plan needs to have is a laboratory approval form. It's going to include sampling for your chlorine, your bacteriological, lead and copper, etc. It's going to include the certification that the lab used to analyze samples, and it can be found on TCEQ's website or in the compliance notebook. Whenever I had stopped being an investigator, this was something that they were like, hey, you really need to start looking at this. And I know a lot of systems didn't have it. So if you do not have this in your monitoring plan, please make sure and do it and add it to it. All right, again, RTCRs need to be attached to your monitoring plan, and that's just some more information on those. All right, my favorite, I love distribution system maps. I absolutely love showing up to a water system and they have a giant map on the wall and you can see like the pin marks and the mud and smudges that are all on it. I love a distribution system map. And you can see here that they have taped this one together. Love that. So the main thing here is that you have to have an adequate and up-to-date distribution system map. You also have to have your valves and mains located on there, and that's so that during emergencies, you know where those are located. And then you also it must be maintained and updated for the life of the water system. All right, common mistakes that we see. This is a big one since Texas is growing so fast that your map is outdated. You're too busy, and I get it, worrying about other stuff to worry about updating your map. So making sure that your map is updated as you have a lot of growth in your system is a big thing. And ensure the map is updated every time there are changes to the distribution system. Like I said, new construction, stuff like that. And then identifying all of the valves on the map, isolation, flush, dead end, all that. So is this distribution system map a compliant distribution system map? Yes, it is. So I don't know if y'all can really see that, but it has a legend and it tells you where the flush valves are and where the lines are and what the line sizes are, and it does appear to be up to date. Okay, public notices. So the main thing here is any public notice that you have to issue, you need to keep those records for at least 3 years. And all of your public notices can be found on TCEQ's website. If you need a public notice, you can go on there, search for it, and you'll be able to find it. You know, whenever your investigators come out, they will kind of glance through your public notices, look at them, make sure that you're doing all of that correctly. So this is a record that you'll need to maintain for at least 3 years. Okay, my second favorite thing, I know distribution maps were my first, but I love tank inspections as well. So as you can see, one of the operators had a leak and drilled a bolt into there to stop the leak. So these are just some really cool things that you see while out in the field. So tank inspections, you have to inspect all of your ground storage tanks and pressure tanks on an annual basis. That's internal and, for ground storage tanks and elevated, internal and external. So if you have a pressure tank that has an inspection port, the interior surface must be inspected every 5 years. And all of these records need to be kept for at least 5 years. And that's so that if you have a pressure tank and an investigator comes out, we can say, hey, 5 years ago, did you actually look at this pressure tank? And you can say, yes, I kept my records for 5 years and can prove that to you. Another thing is that we've seen is each of your tanks has to have its own separate form. So you can't add, 2 ground storage tanks to one form or a pressure tank and a ground storage tank to the same form. Each tank that you have should have its own individual form. So the inspections of these tanks can also be done by water operators. You don't have to hire a company to do them for you. You can do them yourself. Not a lot of people know that. So you can do these yourself and it will save you a lot of money. So common mistakes that we see on the tank inspection forms: completing the ground storage tank and pressure tank inspections on the same form. Each tank needs its own form. Not identifying the tank on one form. So say that you have 3 50,000-gallon ground storage tanks and you just put, 50,000-gallon ground storage tank, 50,000-gallon ground storage tank, 50,000-gallon ground storage tank. I don't know which tank that is, so you need to identify them. Tank 1, tank 2, tank 3, north, south, east, west tank. However you want to identify it, it needs to be identified on that form. Not inspecting the pressure tank with an internal port once every 5 years. It's another thing. So if you have an inspection port on your pressure tanks, you need to inspect them every 5 years. Not conducting internal inspections annually on ground and elevated storage tanks. So that just means that you're going up there, you're opening the hatch, you're looking inside there, making sure that it's not rusted out on the roof and stuff, and that everything inside looks good. Okay, so this form over here is the tank inspection form that you'll need to fill out for your pressure tanks, ground storage tanks, elevated tanks, all that. And then this one over here is a filled out form, and we're asking, is this compliant? But it is going to be no. The main reason here is because it says pressure tanks. So they had multiple pressure tanks that they inspected on one form. And like we've said, each one needs to have its own form. All right, well completion information and sanitary control easements. This is also a record that as long as you have that well, you need to keep. And any exception letters that you have that might go to each one of these wells, you also need to keep for as long as you have it. And then this last one, so plugging reports and stuff like that. So if you have a well that you just have sitting out there and you're like, maybe one day I'll use it, but you have not used it in 5 years, you're gonna need to either prove to the TCEQ that it's in a non-deteriorated state or plug that well. And that is another thing, another record that you will need to keep if you just have a well sitting out there that you think you might use one day. All right, NSF certification for chemicals and media used for your system. Before you have your inspection, I always advise calling your chemical provider and saying, hey, send me all of the NSF for any chemicals that I have. And if you can't find the one for any like media that you would have, call them and ask for that as well. Because they, it can change what blend of chemical you're using and stuff. So you need to have that record available of the most recent chemical that you're using. And again, this record, you need to keep certifications for as long as you use the chemical or media in your system. All right, cross-connection control program. This is something that everyone should be familiar with, but we're gonna go over it. So The TCEQ requires that you have a cross-connection control program, and those consist of either control ordinances, regulations, or customer service agreements. It's also going to consist of your customer service inspections or your CSIs, and then your backflow protection that you have in your system. And all of these together make up your cross-connection control program. You must have at least an ordinance, plumbing or cross-connection regulations, and a customer service agreement. The rule requires that you must keep these service agreements for as long as the residents live at that location. If I am talking about CSIs, backflows, and all that, and you're like, I don't really know what all that is, I don't have a adequate cross-connection control program, this lady right down here, Catherine, she is our cross-con person, and she does do directed assistance modules or training for water systems. She can come out and help you establish a cross-connection control program. And that's her email right there. All right, customer service agreements. So if you use a customer service agreement, in that customer service agreement, you have to have a right of entry to where you can go into people's homes and look for cross connections and stuff like that. You have to have a lead ban included in your customer service agreement, internal protections saying that they won't have any cross connections with your public drinking water system, and an enforcement clause. So if you do not follow these rules, what happens? Do you turn off their water, stuff like that? So you have to have an enforcement clause in there. All right, so common mistakes that we would see in a customer service agreement: not having an enforcement clause, not having language regarding the lead ban, not having provisions that allow entry into the home to check for cross connections, and not having a customer signature. That does happen. For whatever reason, there's no customer signature, and then that is no longer a document that gives you teeth to have enforcement or prevent cross connections and stuff like that. All right, so here's a customer service agreement. So is this compliant? Yes, this would be compliant. So it has the no right of entry, it has no direct connection, it has the lead ban percentages in here, and then it also has an enforcement clause. The only thing, like as a document, yes, but the only thing that I did just mention was a customer signature that it does not have, but this is just us looking at their document, so it is okay. Yes, it is a good customer service agreement. All right, what about this one? So is this one compliant? No, it is not. It essentially just has who the person is, what their location is, maybe a form of payment. It doesn't have enforcement or right of entry, no lead ban, no nothing. So this is not good. All right, so on to CSIs, or customer service inspections. So you need to conduct a CSI on any new construction that you have. Also an existing service connection where you suspect there is a hazard, or if you are driving around and see that someone is like installing a new shop on their property that they are now supplying water to, or a new kitchen or bathroom renovation, anything that would have, updates and deals with water, you'd need to do a CSI on that. And I'll tell you, like, whenever I was an inspector, as I was driving through these little small towns, I was from East Texas, I'd say, oh, that looks like a new home. And I would write down the address and I'd go to the water system and say, hey, this looks like a new home. Is that new? And they'd be like, yeah, that's a new home. And I was like, oh, well, do you have a CSI for it? And they're like, no, I don't. So make sure that as you have new stuff coming in, that you're doing your CSIs and keeping those records for your investigator. Okay, another thing, your CSIs have to be conducted by one of the following: customer service inspector, plumbing inspectors, or water supply protection specialists licensed by the Texas State Board of Plumbing. The main thing with the CSIs is that they can identify a cross connection or an actual potential hazard and determine that if a backflow prevention device is needed at that location. All right, and this is what they look like. That is the CSI form. And some common mistakes that we would see with the CSI form is that you're using an out-to-date form, which hopefully now you're not, since the last one was updated, I think, in 2017, and hasn't been updated since then. That you have an appropriately licensed individual conduct these investigations. That is something that your investigators will look at. So that's something that y'all need to be checking so like if you hire a person to do your CSIs, make sure that they're licensed and check on that. Is this compliant? So yes, it is the current form. That's the main thing. All right, backflow test forms. This is another thing. If you have backflow devices in your system, you need to keep these backflow test forms for any backflow that is a hazard, RPBAs. Common mistakes that we would see is using an outdated form. The most recent one, I think, was updated in 2019, so that's still the most current form. Using a form that deviates from TCEQ's format. So if you're hiring a company and they send you a back T test that has like their name and stuff at the top, and they've kind of changed like some wording around, that is not a valid form, and you cannot use that. So it has to be the exact form from TCEQ's website. All right, another thing that we would see is that the test gauge accuracy is out of date. Gauges have to be tested annually for accuracy, and where you can look for that is your accuracy date here is to be within a year of the test date here. And then another thing to look at is that they have these filled out with PSIs and that it closed tight. If it shows that it leaked here, you need to make sure that they went down here and also filled this out. All right, and then another thing is not keeping the original form. So you can't have printed copies of these unless you get approval from TCEQ if you're gonna use like a system or something like that. This has to be the original backflow forms. So make sure that you're not getting copies from the person that you hire, that you're actually getting their original forms. Okay, so backflow forms, which one is compliant? This one over here is compliant. That is the most up-to-date form. The only thing that I did note while I was looking at this, it looks like it showed that it leaked here, and then I didn't see where they had checked that they fixed it here. So that's the only thing that I noticed on that one. And then this one, no, it is not the most up-to-date form. And it is way longer out of date than 3 years now, so. Plant operations and maintenance manual. So every water system has to have a plant operations and maintenance manual, is also known as the O&M manual, and it should have your standard operating procedures. This document is, say you get sick or something happens where another operator has to come in and run your plant. They should be able to pick up this document and know exactly what you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, or annual basis, and they should be able to operate your plant based on this plant operations and maintenance manual. So some new things that were added that you need to add into your plant operations and maintenance manual, if you already have one, is this down here. So these are the new items. That's going to be to include identifying your critical plant equipment and planned protection during adverse weather conditions, identify all treatment chemicals and chemical vendors, and SOPs for chemical feed rates, and dose adjustment, calibration, startup, and shutdowns for emergencies, and copies of links to the manufacturer specifications. All right, so here is a plant operations and maintenance manual. This is what they look like. As you can see, it has the daily requirements, weekly requirements, maintenance, quarterly, annually, and the emergency contact information. And it should have the emergency protocols for man-made and natural disasters as well in there.
I've had the opportunity of working for a couple of engineering firms and having to rewrite these SOPs and from the city of Houston and the various towns around there. And of course, the engineers, whenever they originally designed the system, are required to have an O&M manual. And also SOPs are generated also for those facilities. An issue I ran into was we were redoing some of those, and we had to go through some of the old archives that had been modified. I mean, the plan had been modified since the time it had been initially put in. So we had to go back because of violations from TCEQ to have those redone. And let me say this, you try to find some of that stuff in the archives, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Yep. I get you. I feel you on that. All right, so some common mistakes that we see with the plant operations and maintenance manual. You forgot to include emergency contact information or updating your emergency contact information as you have people leaving your plant and coming into your plant. Not providing enough detail about your routine maintenance and activities. That is a big one. So you need to include detailed information on your SOPs and your routine maintenance. And then not updated when there have been changes to the PWS, such as new wells, you switch your disinfectant, you got a new generator, how do you work it? You need to include all that in there. Okay, so here are 2 plant operations and maintenance manuals, and we're gonna ask, is this compliant? So this one over here, yes, kind of. So like I said, it needs to be in detail. It needs to be, if I need to come out and run your plant, I should be able to go to this document and say, okay, here's how I start everything up. Here's what I do daily, weekly. Here's all the maintenance that's required. I should know how to do that. So this could have more stuff added into each one of these. This one over here, no. So it's missing the emergency contact information. That's the main thing here. All right, drought contingency plans. You have to have a drought contingency plan. If you are over 3,300 connections, you have to submit it into TCEQ, and you need to keep this record permanently and update it every 5 years. So, before your investigation, go dig out your drought contingency plan and say, hey, when was the last time I brought this before council and looked at it and updated it? Make sure this is still what we want to be doing. So some common mistakes, if you're over 3,300 connections, not sending it into Austin, not just checking it every 5 years and make sure that it's still good and that's still what y'all want to do. And then not having a public information clause in there or an enforcement contingency in your drought contingency plan. All right, customer complaint records. This is another record that you need to keep, and hopefully all of you are keeping. You have to keep your water quality complaints for 2 years. And these should include what date your complaint came in, the location, what type of complaint it was, and what y'all did to resolve it. So common mistakes that we see: not recording customer complaints, not recording the resolutions taken by the water system, and not recording the date or location. The main thing I saw here was for like weekends, operators would say, yeah, I got complaints, I got calls on the weekend. Well, did you record those? Well, no, I was busy, busy fixing leaks, busy doing this, that. So just make sure you keep a little logbook, and as you get those calls on the weekends and stuff, that you are recording your complaints. All right, EPPs, I'm not gonna go too much into this. Just know that you need to have an emergency preparedness plan. You should have submitted them into Austin, and you need to keep a copy of your approved EPP permanently for review. Flow meter calibration. So if you are a groundwater system with wells, you have to calibrate your well meter every 3 years. If you are a surface water plant that has a bunch of meters, you need to calibrate those on an annual basis. So common mistakes that we see: not calibrated on a yearly basis for surface water treatment plants, or every 3 years for groundwater systems. And then calibrations are outside the margin of error, plus or minus 5% when you do get them calibrated. And then just not having the record altogether is another thing that is a common mistake that we would see. All right, verification of colorimeters. You need to verify your chlorine meter with accuracy every 90 days. So if you have a low range, high range, you will need standards for low range and high range, and you have to keep these records for 3 years. If you do use a color wheel, then the investigator will look at that, and we need to make sure that they're not faded or dirty, that you keep them out of the sun and whatnot. All right, so some common mistakes that we see: that you're not verifying the colorimeter and that there are no records available. Having expired standards, that's a big one that I would cite a lot whenever I was an investigator. And then only verifying low range or high range when both are required for verification. Is this compliant? So yes, this is. They have the standards, what the reading was, the tolerance, and whether it passed or not. And then it also has the date here as well. So this is an adequate colorimeter verification. And then this is the one from the compliance notebook that you can use. This is the one that I've been using. These are great. I love this one. So if you're looking for records on that, you can find it in that compliance notebook. And that is the end. That's my really cute dog.
Okay, one from online. Is a complaint logbook required, or do copies of service orders describing the complaint and action, is that sufficient?
So as long as you have the date, location, nature of the complaint, and what you did to resolve it, that would be adequate.
I've been talking to a few companies about going paperless, and it has just about everything that you're talking about. Each operator will have their own login, their license number, all that kind of stuff. Is that in compliance? Because the companies still didn't even know. They're like, well, we need to find out about Texas and all that kind of stuff. There's places like our software like WIMS, where they record all their sampling and all that kind of stuff. It goes into a computer system. It sets an alarm, like if they got turbidity too high or something's going out of the MCL. So it gives them an alarm to resample, get another grab, all that kind of stuff to double check. Is that like when you get an investigation, you got to print it out, or?
My understanding is that as long as you can provide that to the investigator to look at, then you're fine.
So we can probably just
As long as you had like
email
a computer,
it to them before they even come?
If you want to do that, or like have a computer ready for them to look at your stuff whenever they come out, that will also work.
Okay, yeah, because you can even upload all your other documents and everything and have complete compliance with it.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, the standards appear to be secondary. Can we use secondary standards for verification?
So for chlorine, that's what you're asking? Yes. So we do allow you to use the gel cells, which is technically a secondary standard, and the rule does state primary or of known concentration. But because TCEQ investigators don't do the primary, they do the secondary check with the gel cells, we do allow water operators to use the gel cells for that.
Do you have to have a drought contingency plan if you're less than 3,000? I saw on your.
You do have to have one if you're less than 3,000. If you, I think transient non-communities, so if you charge for water, you have to have a drought contingency plan. You want to hear a story about this? I put this up here because I had been with the agency maybe a week and a half. I knew nothing about drinking water, and my aunt sent me this photo and was panicked, and then it panicked me. I had no clue what to do, and I almost called 911 on this. So can you imagine being a 911 operator, getting a call? There's water coming out this tank. And luckily, I called my manager, and they were like, no, just call the city. So yeah, that was a lightning strike on overflow, and so it just kept filling, and then it's hitting this little building down here, and so yeah. All right. Thank y'all.